Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People Policy Institute Inside Analysis of Israel's war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip and the continued violence here in the Middle East. I'm Yaakov Katz, a senior fellow at JPPI, and I'm joined this evening by Gil Troy, one of my colleagues at the Institute, as well as Shmuel Rosner, another one of the senior fellows at JPPI. We'll be discussing some of the latest news and insights of what's happening since we're now, I think, day 37, day 38 of Israel's war against Hamas. The broke out, of course, as we all remember, on October 7th with the Hamas invasion. A lot going on. It seems today, the big story at least, one of them is obviously the violence and the flare-up in the north, anti-tank missiles fired at a number of civilian vehicles, people injured there. And we'll try to take a look and see, there was a press conference also last night of, again, the men in black, I call them, the three men who wear the black shirts, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Gallant, and the member of the Inner Forum and Minister of no portfolio, but still a minister, Benny Gantz. And they also gave a little more insight into what might happen in the day after. So we'll talk to Gil and Shmuel to get maybe a bit of their ideas of where this is all headed and what's next. But before that, I did an interview earlier today with Eliezer Marom. Admiral Eliezer Marom is the former commander of Israel's Navy. He was the commander of the Navy back just after the Second Lebanon War in 2006 and was instrumental in really taking the Israeli Navy and moving it up a notch in terms of its operational capabilities and involvement in conflict. A lot of covert operations were done during his term in office. One of the more interesting, colorful characters, I think we could call, of the general staff in recent years. But I spoke to him about, what is the Navy's role in all of this? Because the Navy has been playing a very interesting role. A lot of air support or fire support. Air support would be from the Air Force, but fire support that's been coming from the Navy. But also looking at where's this operation going? And what are some of the next steps that might take place? And of course, Iran that is looming on the horizon. So let's have a listen to the interview with Admiral Eliezer Marom.
Admiral Eliezer Marom, it's great to have you with JPPI. Thank you very much for joining us. So we're talking, obviously, as Israel is at the 37th day of this war against Hamas. And one of the interesting elements, I think, compared to maybe previous conflicts, is really a very active role of the Navy. We've seen the Navy before in other operations in Gaza, of course, the Second Lebanon War 17 years ago. But now it's very active. What can you tell us about what your understanding is of the Navy's role in this war?
There is no difference between other actions that were taken in Gaza to this war. The role of the Navy is almost the same. The Navy, first of all, has to protect the shores of Israel and the facilities that are in the exclusive economic zone. And besides that, has to attack targets in Gaza that are close to the shore. And secondly, to support the troops on the ground in artillery, in direct and very, very precise missiles that are on the platforms of the Israeli Navy that are operating close to Gaza, and to attack anybody that is trying to attack Israel.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of other vessels that are also in the Mediterranean as well as in the Persian Gulf. America has sent 2 aircraft carrier strike groups, the Ford and the Eisenhower. Does that change anything for the Israeli Navy? Is there a lot of, how would you explain the cooperation, the coordination between our Navy and the US Navy?
First of all, I would like to say that in every crisis that has been here in the Middle East in the recent decades, there were always ships from international countries that are coming here and being close to our shores. This happened almost in every war that I participated in here at the past 50 years. But this is not the only thing. The thing is that Israel was transferred by President Trump from the European command to the Central Command. A very big difference, because the Central Command is based in the Middle East, and it's controlling all the countries, or is controlling for the United States all the countries in the Middle East. And I would say that for the first time, the USA Navy brought in here 2 aircraft carriers. I don't remember it happening years, going back years. I don't remember such kind of 2 strike forces here. Some other very interesting vessels, and of course the USS Florida,
Right.
that is a kind of missile shooting, missile shooting hold, and it can shoot a lot of missiles to the range of 2,500 kilometers, and that's way enough to reach all the regions here, all the countries here in the Middle East.
How do you view, if we jump up a level, how do you view the operation as it's been going on the ground? Israel's now 2 weeks, a little more, with ground forces. One of the things that I think is most striking is it seems that they're doing a very good job in the north, right? They've managed to move a lot of the civilians. They've managed to take out a lot of the Hamas targets and infrastructure. Thank God, knock on wood, not extremely high casualties on the Israeli side. They're moving slow, methodically. But what about the south, right? There's all the Hamas brigades, and there's, I think, 3 brigades in the south, the Hamas leadership in the south. How do you understand, like, so they finish the north and then they go to the south? What happens on the larger picture?
That's a very good question. First of all, I would say that the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, is working in Gaza for the first time against the Israeli DNA. The Israeli DNA would say, let's attack them immediately and jump into the center of Gaza. And this would be a very big mistake. This time, Israel is working stage after stage, keeping our soldiers very safe, with very close communications with the Air Force and the Navy, and both are firing and attacking targets that are very close, giving very close fire support to the ground forces. And that is the way how the IDF is saving the lives of many of our soldiers, and on the other hand, is succeeding to go on further and further to the center of Gaza. Now the question is, it's a good question. Why did we start in the north and we didn't start in the south? Because I think that the biggest and the strongest forces of Hamas are in the city Gaza itself, in the north part of the Gaza Strip. And therefore, first of all, you break the resistance of the center of command of Hamas in the Gaza city itself, and then it would be much easier to go to the south part, to Khan Yunis, Deir el-Balah, Rafah, and so on. This will happen very soon, because I think that in Gaza, most of the city is conquered already. Now the second stage in Gaza itself will be, how do we dig them out from the tunnels? This is another question.
The hospitals, the tunnels, and those pieces.
Yes. But in the south, I think it will be much easier.
But practically speaking, so Israel, let's say, says we finished with the north. Now everybody in the south moved to the north. Would that be the way? Because now you have about 2 million people almost in the south. You can't.
No, I don't think so. No. I don't think so. The area where the refugees right now is called the Moasi. It's an agriculture area where when Israeli settlements were in the Gaza Strip, they were there in this area. This area is an area that is quite isolated. So when we go to the south, we don't have to move the refugees from this area. We can keep them there. We can keep them there, isolate them, and fight the Hamas in the camps in the middle of Gaza, and then Khan Yunis, Deir el-Balah, and Rafah, without getting them involved. So I think that we are going to keep them there. This is what I would do.
Right.
And send all the civilians from, or the citizens of Khan Yunis and Deir el-Balah and Rafah to that area as well. Build a very big refugee camp with field hospitals, and then evacuate all the hospitals, because those hospitals are not hospitals. They are actually bases of Hamas, and we need to clear them up. About the hospitals, yeah, please, sorry.
No, very interesting. But I want to ask you, I was looking back at some comments that you've made in the past year, and you were very vocal on Israel's need to confront Iran. And one of the things that I think is maybe one of the problems with this war, to an extent, is that we're fighting against the proxies, right? We're fighting Hamas in Gaza. We have these clashes along the border with Lebanon, with Hezbollah. It might rise to an all-out war. It might stay at what it is right now. We'll wait to see. But Iran is getting away with murder. They are the ones who are doing all of this. They have immunity. Is it not ridiculous? That Israel and the world, for that matter, are allowing Iran to do whatever they want, and they're paying no price.
Iran is the center of terror of the world. Iran is not a regular country. Iran is a country that supports and carries out terrorist attacks, and of course funds all those terrorist groups. And Iran is declaring every day the demolishing of the Israeli state. Every day they are doing it officially. Those are not hidden messages and so on. We will have to attack Iran one way or another. Iran is the head. All the proxies are the hands that are being operated by the head that is in Iran. Israel does not have choice, because if Israel wants to survive, it has, first of all, to fight the proxies. This is Hamas, and later on the Hezbollah. But at the same time, Israel have to fight Iran. There will not be other choice, because otherwise it will be threatening all the time the survivability of the state of Israel.
Let me ask you just one last question before we wrap up. What's your prediction for the North, Hezbollah? Does it stay at what it is, or does it rise above the threshold and turn into a larger confrontation?
Hezbollah has an alternative, and it's only one. The alternative is take all your forces, cross the river Litani, and stay north of the Litani river. And then there is a chance that Israel will not attack you and demolish all your infrastructure after it will finish the work in the Gaza Strip. This is the only chance that Hezbollah has. There is an agreement that's called, and it's a UN resolution 1701.
Right.
That was resoluted after the Second War of Lebanon, 2006. And it says that Hezbollah has to stay northern than the Litani River. This is not what happens here. Israel will not be able to bring back the citizens of the north part of Israel. I know many of them. I was born in that region. So I know that region very, very well. They will not come back to their houses if the force of Radwan, which is almost the same like the commando force of Hamas, Nukhba, will stay close to the border. This cannot happen. People cannot live in house and every day feel that they are threatened, and maybe tomorrow morning someone will knock on their door and will come to kill them. This is impossible. So Hezbollah have one choice. You don't want us to confront you? Go further to the north. Otherwise, Israel will have to confront Hezbollah. There is no other choice.
Yeah. Wow. Former head and commander of Israel's Navy, Admiral Eliezer Marom, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So that was Admiral Eliezer Marom talking to us about what's happening on the ground, right? And I think it was what was telling was two parts to his talk. One was what happens after Israel finishes up in the north? Does it go down to the south? Does it not go down to the south? And how is that going to look? But also considering everything that happened today in the north, in not northern Gaza, northern Israel, the prediction that war with Hezbollah is inevitable. And Gil, let me maybe start with you on that point. You know, Israel is resilient, right? I think that we've seen over the last 5 weeks now, pretty much. Israel's resilient. The people come together. They're standing strong, but at the same time, can we sustain a war that doesn't end, right? How long will the Israeli people stand together on this?
We have a problem in terms of the 6-day war and Entebbe mentality. In many ways, we got used to that story from the 1960s or 1970s. You go in 6 days and triple Israel's size. You go in across the world and you save over 100 hostages in Africa. And unfortunately, the world has changed, but also our tolerance for the intolerable became so great that we allowed that which is unacceptable to become acceptable. On Friday, the IDF announced that 15,000 targets had been hit in Hamas. Hamas targets had been hit in Gaza alone. 6,000 weapons had been seized. Now, during this entire period, we've been told that Israel continues to occupy Gaza. We've been told that Israel is blockading and smothering Gaza, and yet somehow they were able to build up so much infrastructure, so much of a fortress, that having hit 15,000 targets, we now know there's still many, many, many more. So unfortunately, we don't have the luxury to worry about how long the war will go. Right now, I think, thanks to October 7th, there's a clarity. There's a moral clarity, but also a strategic clarity. We know that we cannot allow my cousin, who lived on Kibbutz Nirim very happily for decades and was a good peacenik, my friends in Kiryat Shmona and Metula, we cannot allow them to go back home to October 6th. They cannot go back to a situation where we say, oh, we're just going to be mowing the lawn, or we can handle this. And so somehow or other, both in Gaza, the southwest, and in the north, something has to change. The other thing we have to be well aware of, and I'm speaking to a lot of people in Miluim in reserves in the north, including my son and children of other friends, there's a tremendous power and tremendous heroism going on in the fighting down south. And, you know, it's so fascinating to see the gap between parents and kids. Parents want their kids to stay out and kids want to go in, which shows, you know, the amazing generation we have and the amazing heroism. Up north, it's a different.
It also shows why you take soldiers when they're younger.
When they're young. Up north, there's a different kind of heroism, the heroism of waiting, the heroism of restraint, the heroism of deterrence, the heroism of knowing week after week, as tensions economically grow, as tensions with the wife and kids grow, as just simply boredom grows, that we have to overcome those tensions too. And it's really important for us as a society to support those in the north as much as we support those in the south, and not just get so addicted to the war stories, which of course are so important, but also the spiritual resistance that's required. And some of that is entailed in continuing to have weddings, as we're going to have 2 weeks from now. It's about continuing to send falafel and hummus, and most important, sending hugs and support.
You know, by the way, on the 15,000 targets that have been struck by the IDF, just one other number to add to the mix, because I was looking into this last week as well, is when you think about 15,000, it's not 15,000 bombs or shells that were fired. It's at least double that, right? So if you think about 15,000 targets, then what we're looking at, just alone, Israel has fired about anywhere from about 10 to 12,000 artillery shells. And then you have targets that are also struck. You're looking at 1 to 2 bombs. So we're looking at this massive amount of ammunition that is being dropped on Gaza. and I know we're getting a lot of flack and a lot of criticism for the number of people who have been killed in Gaza, right? The Hamas is claiming it's 10,000. They're saying all civilians, right? Because they don't consider anyone to be a terrorist. We're saying, anywhere from about 40% to 50% are terrorists. But when you think about those numbers, dense population, amount of munition, amount of targets, and then people say, no, Israel is being indiscriminate in the way that it's attacking, it just doesn't add up, right? But then you start going down a rabbit hole, when you start to talk about the numbers. So I do want to go back to the original question, Shmuel. And last night, it seemed to me that for the first time, Netanyahu, second time he took questions. So we're moving in a positive direction. It wasn't from CNN or ABC or Fox News. It was from Israeli journalists. But he was asked about the day after. And he was asked specifically about the return of the Palestinian Authority. And his answer was, we cannot allow a Palestinian Authority that pays salaries to terrorists and incites in its education system to kill Jews to come and take over in the Gaza Strip. People read that as if he's saying there will never be a Palestinian Authority coming back to the Gaza Strip. What my ears heard was actually Netanyahu outlining the way for the Palestinian Authority to come back to the Gaza Strip. It was him saying, if they stop paying salaries to terrorists, if they stop inciting in their education system, then I can allow for them to come and take over in the Gaza Strip. Which way do you see it going?
Well, in practice, it's the same answer, because I don't think that the Palestinian Authority is ready to meet the conditions of Prime Minister Netanyahu in order for them to get the reward of returning to Gaza. So one way or the other, what Netanyahu was saying yesterday, and in some way he exposed a gap between Israel and the Biden administration and many other powers in the world. What Netanyahu was saying yesterday is that the arrangement of a Palestinian ruler of Gaza, which is as bad as Hamas or even just as bad as the Palestinian Authority, would not be acceptable to him. Of course, there are many caveats that we can put into these remarks. First of all, it's not clear that the day after is a day after in which Netanyahu will be the decision maker. The day after can come 3 months from now, or 3 years, or maybe 5 years from now. And what we are looking at is clearly a process. There's no way for the Palestinian Authority to take over tomorrow, or next week, or next month. It will be a long process in which Israel is gradually taking over Gaza. I thought what Marom told you, General Marom, one of the things that he highlighted, and it is an interesting point that worth mentioning again. He basically told you how Israel strategically surprised Hamas. Hamas was able to surprise us by launching, sadly, a successful attack on Israeli civilians.
Right.
Israel responded in its own way of surprise by moving very slowly forward. Hamas was probably expecting a response by Israel.
Right, because that's not the Israeli way, right? Israel, you would expect Israel to react.
Hamas leaders were preparing themselves for a return of previous Israeli missions or operations. And what Israel does this time is completely different. Of course, for this, you need the international umbrella, the support of the Americans. There are many conditions that had to be met for Israel to be able to launch such surprise attack. But weirdly, the very slow process with which Israel conquers Gaza is the way for Israel to surprise Hamas. So, and going back to the question on the Palestinian Authority, I think it is clear that right now in Israel, there is not much support for the Palestinian Authority taking over Gaza. Will this change in the future because of international circumstances, because the Palestinian Authority is going to change, because of a change of regime in Israel itself and a change of government? That's a possibility. But if we are talking about the short term day after, day after, there is tomorrow, and then there is the day after tomorrow, and the day after next week, and the day after next month.
Sure, it's a long
So
process.
Short term day after, the Palestinian Authority is not currently the candidate. Long term day after, that will be a long process of negotiation.
Okay, but let me push back on this, and Gil, let me start with you, but I also want to hear what you have to say, Shmuel. Part of my read of the situation is, we have the legitimacy clock, which is ticking, right? And we want to keep up the legitimacy for this operation. One of the ways to do that is to show the world that there is a plan, right? It's not just about destruction of Gaza. It's about something bigger. And you have to present that plan to the world for them to understand that we're not just here to destroy and to kill. We have a bigger vision. So far, Israel has not outlined that. So we're 5 weeks into this. Let's be honest, right? The pictures coming out of Gaza are a tragedy, right? What's happened in Gaza. Now, I pity the civilians of Gaza. I don't feel bad for Gaza. What they did to us, this is the response. And this had to be the response because of the way Hamas operates. However, people suffer there. People have been killed. People have lost their homes, buildings, infrastructure, all destroyed. For Israel to keep doing that, they have to say, okay, we're doing this because we're going here or we're going there. So far, we haven't done that. So don't we have to tell that story and outline a vision to be able to continue and keep the legitimacy?
This gets to three very fundamental problems. The first is that for decades now, we've been reacting. We've been on defense. We used to be much better at being visionary, at being on offense, at changing realities. And part of the whole day after conversation we have to have, as historians, about what went wrong is how do we get into that mode where we wait for Hamas. I mean, I have a cousin, this cousin on Kibbutz Naim, she said years ago that my government isn't Bibi Netanyahu, my government is Hamas, because Hamas decides if I'm having a good day or a bad day. Hamas decides if I'm in my safe house or not. So one is we've gotten too defensive, too reactive. Two is that, not wanting to go into politics too much, we have a government which has consistently over the past, not in its latest iteration, but for the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years, Bibi Netanyahu was so focused on survivalism that he wasn't giving a broader vision of many things. And it was very interesting in the press conference. After the press conference, he also gave a directive to the cabinet of speak sensitively, think before you speak.
Well, that's because you have all these ministers who are saying one more idiotic thing than the next.
I know, but we've been having that for years. Why isn't that part of Israeli governing culture? Why don't you know that when you're a minister, or even when you're an analyst as a senior fellow at JPPI, you think before you speak? So that gets to some of the
well, that gets back to what Shmuel said, Gil, of surprising Hamas with the response. Right, exactly. He waited.
Right, and that was, I agree with Shmuel, that was the genius of going very, very slowly. But the third piece really is, I would try to bring in a conversation about the Saudis, whether it's realistic or not. I would try to really think out of the box. Part of the problem is we've known this. I mean, a year ago or a year and a half ago when terrorism increased in the territories, and we all thought it was a Hamas play just to kind of figure out how it could position itself as a successor to Abbas in the Palestinian Authority. Everybody was recognizing the fact that the Palestinian Authority is so weak, so corrupt, so unpopular. So even if Bibi Netanyahu was the biggest two-state solution guy there is, going to the Palestinian Authority with all its weakness, with all its with all the degree to which it's alienated from regular Palestinians, wouldn't necessarily be the smart thing. So you're absolutely right. We need to have a group of people, and I actually understand that Gallant has started a group that's thinking about the day after.
Yeah.
But and maybe, as with Shmuel's point about the military, rather than jumping ahead and just throwing out some idea, we're going to learn. We're going to be a little deliberate. We're going to think through who could be potential partners. We know the Egyptians don't want to touch them. We know there was just this Islamic Arab summit, which basically, behind all the rhetoric, said to the Palestinians, like Nasrallah said, you're on your own. And so we Israelis are going to have to figure out what is the day after scenario that works. That's the most humane kind of answer to a post-Hamas Gaza.
I'm not sure we have a clear answer, right? And maybe you're right. Maybe that will take time. Shmuel, to the question of outlining that vision, right? Israelis don't want to do it. And by the way, one of the big criticisms that you hear often, mostly from the left side, whatever's left of the left in this country, will be that the TV stations in Israel don't show any of the pictures or images of what's happening in Gaza, right? It's as if it doesn't even exist, right? Can Israelis have that conversation about the day after in Gaza? Is that possible?
Well, they can have it, but in fact, on this issue, I tend to agree with the Prime Minister Netanyahu that it is premature to talk about the day after in Gaza, because the day after in Gaza depends in many ways on the outcome of the war. We don't yet know what the outcome of the war is going to be. We don't know if Hamas really stays or goes. We know what the objectives of the war are, but we didn't see the end result of the war. We don't know yet what's going to happen with Hezbollah in the north. So we are in the midst of a process. You can get some smart people, put them in a room and ask them to write a paper in which they will lay out a vision for Gaza. But how serious is it to envision a future for Gaza when you don't yet know what's going to be the outcome of the war? I think that here the problem is an impatient world and even more impatient media. The war barely started and we already want to know how Gaza is going to be in 2028.
Well, that's the Israeli, lack of patience, right?
Israeli and again, the fact that international players, on the one hand, they agree on principle that Hamas cannot be there, and on the other hand, come with all kinds of demands on who's going to be this successor for Hamas. It's premature, and sometimes it is better to just move slowly towards a certain objective that you define, which is to uproot Hamas. Then we know that Gaza will have to be rebuilt in some ways. We will need to think about the resources for that, the infrastructure that can handle and manage that, and the type of administration that can be in charge of that. Netanyahu made one thing very clear: Israel isn't going to let someone else be in charge of security over Gaza. I don't think Netanyahu is able to tell the Israeli public anything other than this exact answer. I actually polled Israelis last week, and most Israelis today believe that there is no real difference. And we asked a specific question: there is no real difference between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. This is what most Israelis believe, not just on the right. So for Netanyahu to come forward and say, well, my plan for the future is to replace Hamas with the entity that most of you believe is as bad as Hamas, that's not a good plan. We have to be more patient about this, and I would urge Israel's international partners to be more patient about this. And even if they do want to have a discussion about the possibility of the Palestinian Authority taking over at some point, this ought to be a discreet discussion behind closed doors, and not something that is done because of political needs, namely President Biden's political needs, or something that pushes Netanyahu in a way that he cannot politically respond to in proper way. So again, it's premature, and if you want to do it now, do it behind closed doors. Other than that, I don't see any reason to decide now what's going to happen in Gaza in 2025.
Well, on that optimistic note, let me just say as we wrap up, obviously the Gaza operation also carries with it the price and the toll that it takes from Israel. There were the story of the 5 reservists who were killed over Friday night. And just 2 of them for our listeners and our viewers, let me just mention one, Moshe Leiter, a doctor and a former commando in Shaldag. His father, Yechiel Leiter, I know him personally. I'm sure some of you know of him. He works at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, which is another think tank in Jerusalem. An American citizen, his father from Pennsylvania, mother originally from Chicago.
And was Prime Minister Netanyahu.
And Prime Minister Netanyahu's former chief of staff.
When he was a finance minister.
Exactly. And Yossi Hershkovitz, who I happen to know personally, very friendly with a few of his brothers, who was an amazing educator and the principal of a school here in Jerusalem, Pelech, a boys' school, and was a teacher, actually spent at least a year or 2 at SAR in New York, in Riverdale. So, the ties that these specific soldiers have with the Jewish community in America, but also just the tragic loss of amazing people who have achieved so much and really are mitovei banenu, from the best of our sons and the best of the people that Israel has. And in their memory, we'll sign off tonight, and in the memory of all the other soldiers who have fallen. Thank you all very much for coming to another session of JPPI's Inside Look at the war in Gaza. We'll be back again tomorrow. And in the meantime, prayers for a quiet night.